Now, let's talk further about this heart. Mencius gave an example to show that humans have a heart. What example did he use? The example of a kid falling into a well. The kid is called the little one, and falling into the well represents his tough situation. Can you see it? When the little one falls into the well, what emotions arise within us? We feel fear, sadness, and compassion in our hearts when we see a kid falling into a well. The kid is struggling in the water, and we feel afraid and sad. Without thinking twice, we're driven to save them. Mencius made it clear that when we save the kid, it's not because we want to be friends with their parents or gain a good reputation in the community, nor is it to avoid a bad reputation if we don't save them. None of those reasons matter. It's because we genuinely feel fear, sadness, and compassion in our hearts. Between me and this kid, we're two different people, right? I have my body, and he had his. We were separate individuals. What do we call this separation? It's the physical barrier, the gap between our bodies. When this kid falls into the well, in that moment, you naturally feel fear or compassion welling up inside you. When this feeling arises, what happens to that physical barrier? It breaks, it goes beyond the barrier. And now, what are you and this kid? You're connected as one. This is what we call the benevolent connection. Now, let's focus on the main point of Mencius' teachings. Each of us exists as an individual. In English, we use the word individual. Those who have studied English are familiar with this word, right? Individual, meaning a separate entity. This word has two meanings, one is an individual, and the other is a person. When we add the suffix ism after individual, it becomes individualism, which has been the guiding principle of Western society since modern times, known as individualism. In modern Western society, capitalism took hold while Christianity declined. Back in the medieval era, Europeans lived within religious communities, like the church, where they were seen as individuals within a larger group. But as Christianity lost its influence, they started to see themselves as separate individuals. They began to establish relationships based on rational principles, like contractual agreements driven by reason. That's why individualism became the fundamental principle in Western society, and it still holds true today. Chinese thinking struggles to understand this concept and finds it hard to assimilate. Even though we acknowledge the physical barriers that separate us, we are still connected. And what brings us together? It's the power of good conscience. Imagine seeing a child fall into a well. It naturally stirs up fear and worry inside us. In that moment, what do we become to that child? We become one, connected by a sense of compassion. After all, the child is a human, just like us. When they're in trouble, we feel scared and sad because we share a common humanity, you know? But what if it's not a human in need? What if it's an animal, like a bird or some other creature, crying out in distress? How would you feel then? It's empathy. You'd understand and sympathize with the animal's pain and cries. Suddenly, you're united with that animal, feeling its suffering. Animals are still pretty close to us, aren't they? They're living beings too. Now, let's think about plants and flowers. According to Wang Yongming, if we witness flowers and plants being needlessly trampled upon, we'd also feel a sense of pity and compassion. In that moment, we become one with the flowers and plants, caring about their well-being. Even though their life is different from ours, they're still living beings, right? And what about non-living things like rocks and bricks? If they're needlessly destroyed, we'd also feel a sense of concern and care. We become connected with those objects, treating them as part of our shared world. This is what we call the unity of benevolence. So, when our hearts are moved, they can resonate with everything, connecting us to the entire universe. That's the essence of the Chinese worldview. Later on, a philosopher named Lu Xiangshan came up with a saying, "My heart is the universe, and the universe is my heart." It's all about the core of our existence. But hey, don't go sharing this with foreigners, they'd be seriously taken aback. It's like telling British scientist Stephen Hawking to forget about studying the universe and start focusing on studying your own heart, as if that's the same as studying the universe. Western thinking may find it hard to grasp this concept. You know how we put a lot of trust in Western natural science, don't we? It has a big influence on us, so we lean towards believing in a universe made up of tangible stuff that can be scientifically explored. But the Chinese, they suggest a moral universe where the human heart can connect with everything, and that just seems ridiculous. Think about it, who's the real odd one out here? Do you agree that the entire universe is geared towards life? Inanimate objects exist to provide the conditions for living beings. Once life comes into play, we get plants, which then create the conditions for animals to thrive and so on, eventually leading up to humans. And what are humans? We're living beings with emotions, and at the core of these emotions is kindness or good conscience. According to the Chinese cosmology, the whole universe is inclined towards life, but what does life tend towards? It's all about emotional connections. We can't survive without the inanimate objects in the natural world. So, when unnecessary destruction happens to rocks and bricks, we feel a sense of regret. Can you imagine surviving without the inanimate objects of this natural world? Then, as plants come into the picture, animals start eating plants, and that's when the food chain is established, right? So, plants lead to animals, and animals eventually lead to the highest form of sentient beings, humans. In Buddhism, what do we call things that are alive? Sentient beings. Beings with emotions, that's what they are. And the pinnacle of sentient beings is us humans. The true essence of human emotional connection, as described by Confucius, is what we call benevolence, which includes virtues and morals. That's why the human heart can connect with everything, and those who embody benevolence see themselves as part of the universe and all its inhabitants. You know about Darwin's theory of evolution, right? It says that higher animals came from lower ones, and advanced organisms evolved from simpler ones until humans came into the picture. According to this theory, humans supposedly evolved from apes, and it's considered progress. But here's the thing, when we look at it from the perspective of Western natural science, it just doesn't add up. Why? Well, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of entropy. If you've studied physics, you've probably come across it. This law tells us that energy in the universe tends to spread out from higher levels to lower levels. In thermodynamics, when all the energy is completely spread out, it leads to heat death, where everything becomes still and lifeless. But the evolution of life goes against this law. It defies the second law of thermodynamics because it moves from lower energy to higher energy. The transition from non-living matter to living matter requires energy to accumulate rather than dissipate. That's the first point. The second point is about survival of the fittest, as Darwin's theory suggests. It says that the simplest organisms are the most adaptable and the ones that survive. The more complex an organism becomes, the less adaptable it is. That's why viruses and bacteria, which are quite simple, are incredibly tough to deal with. They reproduce at an astonishing rate and have strong adaptability. So, why would they need to evolve further? As organisms evolve into more advanced forms, their adaptability actually decreases, and they become more demanding in terms of what they need from the environment. So, when we really think about it, Darwin's theory of evolution doesn't quite align with the principles of natural science as we understand them. You know, it's pretty clear that there's something mysterious guiding the evolution of life, pushing it in a certain direction. It's not something that can be explained by natural science alone. That's why you see Western literature using religion to challenge science, right? When you look at the amazing diversity of life, Darwin's theory of evolution just doesn't quite fit. There's a sense of purpose in the biological world. Take, for example, the eagle's incredible vision that surpasses ours. Can we really attribute that to survival of the fittest alone? No way. There's a purpose behind it, something planned by a higher power. In Western religions, they talk about God, but in China, we don't really have a concept of deity. Instead, we explore the essence of the whole universe. And guess what? The essence is life. It's like the universe's superpower. The Book of Changes, or I Ching, even tells us that life creates more life. The whole universe is all about life. Here rests my case for existence. In the Chinese view of existence, we should have an appropriate relationship with nature. We're like part of this big natural family, you know? We're all in it together. But Western thinking has taken a different path. Their philosophy has turned into Western science, which aims to conquer and change the world, to conquer and change nature. And now, well, we're facing the consequences of that, aren't we? In contrast, the Chinese way of looking at the universe is different. We understand that we have to hunt and eat animals for survival, because that's how the natural food chain works. But beyond just surviving, it's not cool in Chinese philosophy to harm innocent animals on purpose. That just doesn't fly with us, and it totally makes sense, right? So, we've just talked about how the study of the heart started with Mencius. It's pretty cool to pinpoint what that heart really means. But here's the thing, in our modern civilization and society, we've kind of forgotten about it. See, this heart isn't the same as the rational thinking that Western philosophy talks about. Rational thinking is all in the brain. When Confucius spoke of ren, or benevolence, Mencius later called it the heart of compassion. This heart isn't about being rational. It's all about the emotions of life. Now we've got a handle on this whole heart concept. When we talk about truth without considering our emotions and the core of our existence, that's all in the realm of the brain. It's the mind's job to understand the outside world. Quietly using reason, the brain helps us navigate through life, seeking what's good for us and avoiding what's harmful. The whole seeking benefits and avoiding harm thing, that's all part of the brain's territory. But here's the kicker. We're so fixated on this external concept that we're totally missing out on the essence of the heart itself. So, what's the difference, folks? Where does it all come together? Let me break it down with a simple story. I used to know zilch about finance, but recently I've picked up some basic finance knowledge. And you know what? I've come to realize that all the foundational stuff in finance is way beyond what we feel in our hearts. Wang Yangming said, "The heart holds the truth, and there's no truth beyond the heart." Now, that might sound a bit perplexing, huh? Let me give you an example that happened to me. So, someone recently told me, "Hey, you're into stocks, right? Once the value of your stocks hits, let's say, 500 grand, you can use leverage and do fancy stuff like financing and margin trading." And I was like, hold up. Who's gonna let you borrow money for that? You really wanna borrow cash to gamble in the stock market? I couldn't wrap my head around it. But this person insisted it's legal and common knowledge. Well, I guess this whole financing and margin trading thing is a concept that comes from the world of finance, right? But here's the deal. What happens when we actually apply this concept in our actions? It seduces us into borrowing money and taking risky bets. And you know what the outcome can be? You can lose every single penny. I'm talking about going all the way down, to the point where some people even jump off buildings. Ever heard of that? I just found out recently, and it shocked me. So, when I heard all this, I told my friend, when you mentioned financing and margin trading, I called it a concept beyond the heart. That's what it is, a concept beyond the heart. Today's society is obsessed with ideas that go against our true feelings, and it's downright scary. We're abandoning our hearts and embracing concepts that ultimately harm us, as in playing the stock market. Now, what if we bring back some old-school Chinese philosophy, specifically the study of the heart? We know that our hearts hold the real truth, and there's no truth that exists beyond that. The ideas that truly resonate with us are the ones that truly make sense in our hearts. Anything that feels shaky and doesn't sit well within us, those are the concepts that go against our hearts, and we shouldn't buy into them. When we start using them, like using leverage in the stock market, it becomes a dangerous tool that threatens our lives. And when we try to convince ourselves that it won't be a problem by relying on our smarts and skills, that's just a way of dodging the truth. But what happens when we lose touch with our hearts and blindly follow these concepts that go against our true selves? That's what we call losing ourselves, losing our hearts. It's not just about money stuff, but in everything, we tend to believe in ideas that go against what we truly feel. And guess what? It takes a toll on our relationships with loved ones and even with coworkers. We start doubting each other, competing for personal gain, all following these external ideas that we somehow think make sense. Can you believe it? Think about this. When parents and their kids end up duking it out in court, nobody comes out happy, right? Whether you win or your folks win, there's no real happiness there. Do you think your parents would be thrilled if they beat you in a legal battle? Nah, it would break their hearts. And what about you? Would you really be happy if you triumphed over your parents? Nope, it would hurt you too. Because you're going down a path that goes against what you truly feel. It's a recipe for disaster, my friend.